Now, some smells just stick with you through time, don't they? I don't know if you've noticed that. Smells can give more of a memory, an impression on you than sights or sounds. I wasn't aware how this was the case until quite a few years back. I visited my brother who moved into a block of flats. He was living in some flats in Birmingham. And as I went to visit him, there was a lift. I went in the lift and up the lift, and I was struck by a smell that I didn't know that I knew from when I was about 5 or something. It was just bizarre. You see, when I was about 5, that was the last time or so we visited my grandmother, my father's mother, and she lived in a block of flats. And the same smell that I hadn't smelled in however many years just hit me and brought flooding back all these memories that I didn't even know I had. It was bizarre. I don't know if you've ever had that experience before or something like that. But this passage in Isaiah 65 should be like that for us. We should be struck by the fragrance of a memory of a home that we long for. This passage should make us homesick for heaven. I wonder if you are homesick for heaven. I hope that as we've looked at this passage this morning, you will be. You will be homesick for heaven. So what is so appealing about our hope of heaven? Well, 2 things in particular from this passage this morning. The first one in verses 17 to 19. Let me read those again. See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and of crying will be heard in it no more. The first heading, this passage of 2, is this: you are God's delight. You are God's delight. Did you notice the overwhelming emotion of these opening verses? 6 times we get those sort of words: glad, rejoice, delight, joy, rejoice, delight. And notice who it is that is going to be rejoicing in the new heavens and the new earth. Well, first of all, verse 18, it's God's people. Be glad and rejoice forever in what I'll create. Isaiah is speaking to Israel, but as we, as children of Abraham, by faith, share in those promises as well, we are the ones who will rejoice and be glad in heaven. But notice, who else is rejoicing? The second half of verse 18 makes it clear. For, God is speaking, I will create Jerusalem to be a delight, and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. God will rejoice in his people. God's people in heaven won't only experience joy themselves, they will give joy to God. You are to be God's delight. It's astonishing. The joy and delight here are so emphatic, they need an explanation. Why will God rejoice over his people so much? The language of these verses goes beyond any normal kind of joy. In fact, when we read it closely, it becomes picturing something marital. Compare, for example, just a couple of chapters earlier, Isaiah 62, verse 5, God speaks, "As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so will your God rejoice over you." That should be so utterly jaw-droppingly, gobsmackingly amazing, it should stop us in our tracks. God finds delight in his people, and the only metaphor he can come up with that conveys the amount of joy and delight he will find in his people is that of a bridegroom's delight in his bride on their wedding day. That is astonishing. I mean, picture the scene. I get to see it quite regularly. I think this year I'm going to see it 5 or 6 times. The groom is standing here, and the bride is about to come in. Now, at our wedding rehearsal, the vicar said to me, he said, now, Isaac, it's traditional that the groom doesn't see the bride as she comes in. So you will be standing and looking this way, and Rebecca will come in. And I told Rebecca about this, and Rebecca said, nah, there's no way that is happening. This is the only chance you have of seeing me, your bride, walking down the aisle towards you in my dress and everything like that. And so, as I was told, I turned around and I watched her come down the aisle. And I say to every couple as well, I say, well, traditionally, apparently it's the case, but it's your wedding, you do what you like. And sure enough, every time it happens, the groom is looking this way, and I'm close enough to see that everyone else is looking on the bride, but these are knocking together and shaking, and his jaw is dropping down, and his eyes are set on his bride who's coming to him. That's what God says he will be like towards us in heaven. You are God's delight. Look, if you're not a Christian here today, and you're exploring or something like that, let me tell you, you're working out, am I going to follow a God? Which God am I going to follow? Follow a God who looks at you like a bridegroom looks at a bride. That is our God. This passage forces us to banish the thought that somehow God begrudgingly welcomes us back. Begrudgingly welcomes us into his heaven. Remember all that Israel had done to end up in exile. Their rebellion, their sin against God, against one another. Instinctively we think, well, if God is going to welcome us back, it's going to be like a naughty school child is sort of welcomed back after they've been banished from the classroom. You know, they've been naughty and they're sent to the headmaster's office, and then the time is for them to be welcomed back in, and the teacher says, fine, come in, but sit in the corner and keep quiet. That's what we think, isn't it? God will begrudgingly just let us in. And this passage says no. He delights in you. Jesus told the parable, didn't he, of the prodigal son. Son who's ruined it all, said to father, I wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance now. Squanders it, comes back. And what does the father do? Well, I suppose if you come back, but you're going to work on the farm and earn your way back. Drops everything, sees him approaching, runs to him, embraces him, chucks his cloak around him, puts his ring on him, shouts, get the best calf we've got, kill it, let's have a party. My son has come home. God delights in us. And you see, this is the best thing about heaven. We're going to see some other good things in this passage about new heavens and the new earth, but this is the best thing. God himself will be there delighting in us. If home is where the heart is, then heaven is where God is. And the best thing about heaven is it's a place where God will delight in you forever and ever and ever and ever. This is what we've been waiting for with bated breath since the beginning, since Genesis chapter 3, where we screwed it up and we said, we'll live it our way, thanks very much, and sin entered to the world and we were excluded from God's presence. This is the point where we've been waiting for God to call us back home. In heaven, God will delight over you forevermore. Are you homesick for heaven? That was the first thing. Secondly, the last bit of verses 20 to 25. Speaking of the new heavens and the new earths. Never again will there be an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who doesn't live out his years. The one who dies at 100 will be thought a mere child. The one who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. They'll build houses and dwell in them. They'll plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. For as the days of a tree, so will the days of my people. My chosen ones will long enjoy the work of their hands. They'll not labour in vain, nor will they bear children doomed for misfortune. For they will be a people blessed by the Lord, they and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. While they're speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb will feed together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The dust will be the serpent's food. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, says the Lord. What do those verses tell us about the new heavens and the new earth? In summary, this. Everything sad will come untrue. Everything sad will come untrue. And you know I'm a bit of a Lord of the Rings fan. And you'll be familiar with Lord of the Rings probably. In the first book or the first film, depending if you watched or read it, Gandalf, spoiler alert, dies. Gandalf the wizard dies. And everyone's distraught. And the hobbits see it, but he comes back to life again. And everything starts going well, and right at the end, one of the hobbits who doesn't know that Gandalf's back to life again, they've won the war, everything's happened, and then he sees Gandalf. And he says this. He says, Gandalf, I thought you were dead. But then I thought I was dead myself. Is everything sad going to come untrue? It's a great line, isn't it? Is everything sad going to come untrue? And the answer of these verses is yes. Yes. Everything sad is going to come untrue. Now, as we walk through these verses, it's worth noting that this is still prophecy. It's a vision that Isaiah sees. That means it's concerned with imagery. It's more of an impressionist painting than it is a realist painting. We get a feel and a sense of what the new heavens and the new earth are like, but it's not telling us exactly. But let's notice some of the feeling of this scene. First, notice of all in these verses the pure physicality of the new heavens and the new earth. Did you notice? In these verses we have lives that are lived, houses that are built, vineyards that are planted, fruit that is eaten, work that is done, animals that are kept. Whenever the Bible talks about God's purposes and plans for what is yet to come, it always speaks of a new heaven and a new earth. The idea of angels playing harps on clouds and ethereal spirits and things are notably absent from the Bible. God made a physical world with flies, yes. He made a physical world with food and drink and work and play and community and relationships and smells and sights and tastes and sounds and colours. And all along he's promised to restore that to as it should be. Creation will be as it should be, with everything sad come untrue. All the negatives that we know and experience in life will themselves be negated. So look at verse 20. Never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. The one who dies at 100 will be thought a mere child. This is imagery, remember? It's not saying that there's going to be death there. It's speaking poetically and saying, were there to be death there, someone dying at 100 would be an extraordinary thing. The point is that the sadness of death and all that it brings, pain, bereavement, mourning, separation, all of that will come untrue. Look at verses 21 to 23. They will build houses and dwell in them. They'll plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. Here we see that there's going to be a reversal of the curse. When God made a covenant with his people Israel, he promised, I will be your God and you will be my people. Follow me and I will bless you. But if you choose to reject me, if you do not follow me and you do not obey my commands, you will be cursed. Because I am the source of all joy and life and love. And if you turn from me, you lose all that. This is what is written in Deuteronomy chapter 28. It says, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his decrees and commands I'm giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. You'll be pledged to be married to a woman, but another will take her and rape her. You'll build a house, but you won't live in it. You'll plant a vineyard, but you'll not even begin to enjoy its fruit. Your ox will be slaughtered before your eyes, but you'll eat none of it. Your donkey will be forcibly taken from you and will not be returned. Your sheep will be given to your enemies, and no one will rescue them. Your sons and daughters will be given to another nation, and you'll wipe out your eyes, watching for them day after day, powerless to lift a hand. A people that you do not know will eat what your hand and labour produce, and you will have nothing but cruel oppression all your days. And then we read these verses. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat the fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. Verse 23, they will not labour in vain, nor will they bear children doomed to misfortune, for they will be a people blessed by the Lord. All the covenant curses are undone, and God's blessing is poured out on his people. Finally, verse 25. The wolf and the lamb will feed together. The lion will eat straw like the ox, and dust will be the serpent's food. In this closing verse, we have a picture that in the new heavens and the new earth, in the restoration of all things, it is the restoration of all things. God's salvation is for the whole cosmos. Here we have a picture of the whole of creation being at peace and harmony. You won't walk along barefoot in your garden and get stung by a bee. Will not happen. You will not walk through the long grass and get bitten by an adder. Will not happen. There will be no villages fearful that the lion will come in at night and attack. Will not happen. All that harms will come untrue. But notice, not just physical harm will come untrue, but spiritual harm as well. Did you notice the final animal mentioned? The serpent will eat dust. And our Bible brain starts going whirring round, and we trace it back, don't we, to Genesis chapter 3, where the serpent comes and deceives man and woman and is cursed. You will crawl on your belly all the days of your life, and you will eat dust. And the promise is made, Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, to the woman. One will be born of you. In time, someone will be born of you, and the serpent will strike his heel, but he will crush the head of the serpent. Of course, that's fulfilled. That's the very first prophecy in the whole Bible, prophesying that one would come, a Messiah would come who would undo the work of the devil. Jesus Christ, as he was crucified on the cross, as it were, the devil thought he had struck his heel. But on the cross, Jesus crushed his skull. At last, God's great enemy, the devil, will be undone. This is all an incredible vision of God's plan for his people. I hope you are beginning to feel homesick for heaven. This is incredible. But as we end, how can we be sure that this is something more than just a groundless hope? How can we be sure that heaven is real? We'd need someone, wouldn't we? Not just to tell us about heaven, we need someone who'd actually been to heaven. And Jesus Christ himself came from heaven to earth. More than that, he died and went through death itself and returned to heaven. Not to just tell us about it, but to take us there with him. That's what you saw last week, wasn't it? Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, dying in our place so that we can go here, so that we can be with him, so that he can delight in us forevermore. So, what are you homesick for? Because remember, Israel are hearing this. They're going to hear this whilst they're in Babylon, exiles in Babylon. And they need to hold on to this hope, don't they? To get back to God and the promised land. How they need to hear this, how they need to hold on to this. But the New Testament tells us that we too are exiles. The Apostle Paul says our citizenship is in heaven. Paul says, as it were, you might have a national passport, but that's just your temporary residence. Your national passport is a temporary passport. You have a citizenship in heaven, a heavenly passport. You are an exile here, waiting to return home. Are you homesick for heaven? Let me pray. Lord God, thank you so much that you don't just come to take us to be with you through the cross, but you show us this wonderful picture and image of what awaits us. And Lord, the ultimate joy, the ultimate delight and wonder of that is that we will be with you forever. Thank you for this foretaste of heaven now. And Lord, make us, by your Spirit, homesick to long more and more, to see this life as it is, temporary, and long for things eternal. Strengthen our faith that you have achieved all of this for us through Jesus' death and resurrection. We pray this in his name. Amen.